The agenda this week tuned into the early days of election campaigning here in Ontario, debated decriminalizing illicit drugs, and considered vaccine mandates in the workplace. The agenda's week in review begins with Conservative Party leader Erin O'Toole in his first one-on-one interview since the federal election.
I want to circle back to the issue of you because, well, put it this way. I don't know what James Cumming, your former MP from Alberta, is going to come back with, but I suspect part of it is going to be, Erin O'Toole, I've known you for 20 years. I always thought of you as a sort of a moderate red Tory. But when you ran for the leadership of the party, you ran as a true blue Conservative. You hit all those hot buttons that true blue Conservatives love about cancel culture and privatizing CBC television and that kind of thing. And then when the election campaign started, you made a very deliberate decision to move your party to the more moderate middle in order to appeal to those liberal Tory switchers that you referred to earlier. I wonder if part of, I don't know, I'm just asking, I wonder if part of your problem here is that Canadians aren't clear in their own minds about what kind of a Conservative you are.
Well, I think there's some truth to what you're saying. Canadians not sure. They still don't know me as well as they think they might. In fact, our numbers went up dramatically as people got to know me, Steve. But our own exit polling said some of the people that considered us but didn't close the deal, they're telling us didn't know enough about Mr. O'Toole. So part of that is true. Part of it is not true. If you actually look at the leadership race, I'm a proud true blue Conservative, but I stand up for the rights of all Canadians, and I have since the day I walked in the House of Commons. So I was even attacked for my position on LGBTQ rights, for example, but I'll make no apologies. I was in uniform to fight for all Canadians' rights in our institutions, and I will always do that. I said we'd fallen short on climate change, and we needed a serious approach to tackling climate change. It's an important issue for me as a parent as much as it is a Conservative. And I'm a true blue Conservative. I've served in the military. I've never asked for anything. I've put myself through school. You know my own background. I'm from Bowmanville. I'm always going to fight for people that need a voice. And I don't, I don't believe people that define conservatism in one way or another. What are you putting forward as leader? That's always how I've conducted myself. So I'm still as true blue today as I was then, Steve.
Okay, but some of the members of your party obviously do define conservatism in one way or another, even if you don't. And if they thought, I know Erin O'Toole, he's a true blue Conservative who has these small c conservative views on a whole range of issues, and I like that about him, and then they see a guy who's trying to sort of drag, in some cases, kicking and screaming members of the party more to the center to broaden your appeal, can you understand why they would be quizzical about what kind of Tory you are?
Yes, and in fact, I don't profess that we were perfect. In fact, when I launched a very comprehensive climate change policy that has a price on carbon but not a carbon tax, we stumbled a bit on how that got out. It was leaked. I hadn't been able to brief my caucus. The caucus felt disappointed by that. But in the election campaign, I'll tell you, I got a lot of praise from people saying, hey, it was great to see the Conservatives brought up an innovative approach to meet our Paris targets without the economic disruption of Mr. Trudeau's carbon tax. I can do that better next time by, I think, engaging caucus better, by making sure we can get out and explain these issues better. But that some of those issues are being used as Erin O'Toole departing from where he was in the leadership. But if you look, I was criticized in the leadership for saying we needed to be more serious on climate change. I want those urban voters in the maps you showed, Steve, to know that on any issue that is of concern to their family, the Conservatives of Canada will have a solution for you. It will be free market based, it will be smaller government, it's not going to be an Ottawa knows best approach, but we have to show we're tackling the issues of 2021.
The Premier said, quote, "The worst place you can give your money is to the government. It doesn't matter if it's municipal, provincial, or federal." Ginny, how should we interpret that?
Well, I think, we can always go back to the Ford family brand is strong. And I think one of the Premier's strengths is that he knows, he has sort of a gut instinct about how people feel about government and how they want government to intervene in their lives. They appreciate services. They appreciate things that only government can build, like highways and transit and all the things that he wants to say yes to. But at the end of the day, they don't want to be taxed into oblivion. I mean, his brother learned this by talking about the gravy train at the City of Toronto, and I think that remains. And don't forget, as these issues progress on the provincial landscape, there are a lot of things going on. There is inflation that appears to be potentially going to be sticking around a lot longer than people realize. The cost of living is going up. And I think people are going to become very, very, very sensitive to any kind of new tax or fee. And we know that when parties of the left are given power, they want to find a way to fund their promises, and they are more comfortable with taxing people than certainly Doug Ford is. And so he wants to remind people that he reduced their cost of living, and he wants to remind them, I think, that other parties would intervene and take more money out of their pockets if they were able to get power back.
Kim, what did you think when you heard the Premier say that?
That he still fundamentally doesn't understand the value of government and the value of supporting Ontarians. Look, this is a big province. It takes a lot of money to run, but there's also a lot of situations that can be recalibrated. Certainly, healthcare can be recalibrated, but it has to be recalibrated in a way where people actually can access services. And I'll tell you, I grew up as a border kid outside of Windsor. You didn't have to look very far to understand how quickly you could become homeless by just having to go to the hospital. Those are not the things we want to see. But the corollary of that is that there are lots of services we do need to support people on, making sure that not only do you get to go to the doctor, but that, oh, wait, the prescriptions they write you can take. So being able to afford those things, people are understanding much more, especially in the last 2 years, the value of what governments can do, can be a part of, where they can be a force for good and for change, and frankly, where they can come up short. And what I know about Andrea Horwath, and I know people like to talk a lot about, oh, this is her, third or fourth kick at the can.
Fourth.
The reality is she continues to grow. She continues to resonate with people. And what we're also seeing is that people are taking a look at her post-pandemic and go, okay, I now get where the value of governments are, where we can support our communities. And they're looking at her as potential premier, not just that steel town scrapper that we know and love, but what can she do? What can she bring to the table? And what's the team around her that can really make Ontario better?
Sumi, what was your view when you heard the Premier say the worst place you can send any money is to a government?
Well, I think it's missing the point that, I think people are suffering, Ontarians are struggling, and we need a government that is able to understand that and to be able to support our Ontarians, whether it's providing living wages, to keep up with inflation, or restructuring our healthcare system to support all of the long-term care, or ensuring that we've got the right infrastructure for our education system with students going back into schools with the pandemic. We're looking for a government that understands and is empathetic, and that's, I think, what you'll get from the Ontario Liberal Party and its leader and its team. We're looking at $10 a day childcare, and understanding that the impact of childcare has on our working class families. A 4-day work week. We've understood what the pandemic has meant for Ontarians. Over 130,000 employees in Ontario have chosen family over work, and that we need to ensure that our working systems are able to recalibrate itself to understand the new normal. And we need a government and a leader that understands that just keeping the money in the bank is not all. Government is meant to support our Ontarians to ensure that they have the right services and infrastructure to be able to move forward with their lives. And in order to do that, we need to be able to fund it.
We are starting to see, I think, more and more employers say that if you don't get vaccinated, you may not have a job. I mean, the Toronto Transit Commission, the TTC, suggested the other day that their members have got to get vaccinated or they're fired. How concerned are you about your members being fired if they don't get the jab?
Well, Steve, of course, we're concerned about workers for any reason not being at the workplace. Being fired, of course, is going to put an added stress on the workplace. We don't want to see any healthcare workers, obviously, get ill or die from this virus. We already lost 5 members, so definitely we support the vaccine mandates. It's about workplace safety. It's about knowing that you're protected and knowing that the person you're working shoulder to shoulder with is protecting you. But again, we do obviously have a staffing crisis that we talked about many times on your show. So the vaccine is adding to that crisis. But I have to tell you, Steve, it is not the only reason why workers are leaving the workforce and the sector. So absolutely, we're concerned about them not being at work and for whatever reason terminated or what is it? It's leave without pay. We need those workers to be at the workplace, and we need to find solutions for all of it, not just the vaccine.
No, I appreciate that, and you're quite right. We have had many discussions on this program about the difficulties that the people who do the jobs of some of the hardest jobs in society, we want to make sure they're on the job. But do you believe it is a reasonable response for an employer to say, particularly in healthcare, you must be vaccinated or you're out?
It's all about keeping people safe, and absolutely we support keeping the workers safe and healthy and, quite frankly, alive, and the people that they care for. SEIU has supported mandatory vaccinations. Our members, close to 80%, do, and they look at it, as I said, as a issue of workplace safety, protecting themselves, their co-workers, and the people that they care for.
Okay. Julie, how do small businesses that you represent feel about a vaccine mandate?
Well, we surveyed them in August, and it was split. 54% are in favor of vaccinations of employees in the workplace, 34% are against, and 12% are undecided. So the challenges are very different for a small business than a larger business. If the government doesn't make this law, and we're not suggesting that they do, the vulnerabilities for human rights and legal complaints are higher for small businesses, although the Human Rights Commission did come up with a web post on September 22nd saying that you didn't have to accommodate individuals if they choose not to be vaccinated for personal reasons. However, I go back to my earlier point. If the government isn't making it law, small businesses are vulnerable to potential human rights and legal challenges, and they do have challenges with accommodating employees. It's easy for a large business to find accommodations for employees when they have hundreds or thousands of employees, but for a small business that has 3 to 5 employees to begin with, how do you make accommodations that are actually allowable?
Ryan, let me get you in here then. Do you believe it is legal for employers to fire employees if they don't get vaccinated?
I think that they can. I think when we start with the premise that an employer's job is to keep workers safe, having a policy where their employees have to get vaccinated certainly makes sense. Now, the caveat, which we've already discussed, is that if there's a human rights concern, and the only 2 so far that have been credible in the eyes of the law are if there is a medical exemption, which has been limited, and also a religious exemption. Again, with religion, it's been limited as well. You haven't seen many cases that have been able to make it through the court system successfully. And with that, if an employer does let an employee go, they are entitled to severance. So I don't believe that an employer can let an employee go because they are not vaccinated and not pay them any severance.
Ryan, do you think employees are somewhat in the driver's seat here, particularly in the service sector, in as much as we're hearing there's a tremendous shortage of people to work in that sector right now, and if they don't want to get vaccinated, maybe that's something employers are just going to have to put up with?
Well, you're right. It's sector by sector, and certainly in the service sector, it looks to be that employees have the upper hand.
Let me put this quote to you from the Vancouver Police Chief, Adam Palmer, who's in favor of decriminalization, who said in July of 2020, if you arrest someone on possession of a drug, that's a very short-term action that doesn't provide any sort of solution. Whereas if we have someone and we can get them into a pathway of treatment, get them proper supports, then you have longer-term benefits. You've heard what Quam has had to say. You've heard what this Vancouver police chief has had to say. How do you respond?
Well, honestly, nobody knows the territory you just sketched out is unexplored territory. The idea of methamphetamine, heroin, fentanyl, cocaine being decriminalized, readily available, accessible, and on the streets in a way without intervention is unexplored territory. And we're already some degree seeing the ravages of the impact of that on our public health system in the United States, the degree to which we have moved from marijuana's cannabis capacity to be legalized into polydrug traffickers still present. And what we're seeing is a public health cost that's simply extraordinary. In the United States, nearly 100,000 people a year now are dying from overdoses. And the great majority of those are opioid-based. The users themselves get tolerance over time and need more and more until finally they degrade their health to such a degree that they either die or the morbidities are so high. The cost to the public health system is extraordinary. And the damage to the individuals and the loss of a generation is something we have to seriously entertain here as the prevalence rate climbs so steeply. Here's another dimension. Most drug users who are in serious drug use patterns intensify over time. And it's over time that we begin to see the ravages showing up. And they use multiple drugs simultaneously. So the same people who are overdosing on prescription drugs have on board at the time of their crisis illicit cocaine, illicit opioids such as fentanyl, illicit benzodiazepine taken inappropriately. They're polydrug users. And the crisis becomes when you decriminalize, you may have an acceptable level of provision of the drug through, say, cannabis, through Canada itself, providing some legal access to cannabis. But you also have the black market. It is not driven out. It is still present, and it capitalizes on the increased prevalence and on the increased intensification of the drug user's needs. So you still got a contaminated, dangerous, violent, coercive, black market trafficking operation going on outside. At the same time, you're trying to say to people, possess drugs, use them, and we won't interfere with you. You're igniting a real, genuine conflagration.
Quam, can I get you to respond to that?
Yeah, I think that most people would say that decriminalization goes with increased access to supports, maybe regulation and safer supply of drugs. So there's a whole number of things you have to put in place. And so the truth is that the way we're going, the criminalization has not worked. We have seen rising deaths. We have seen sort of use on the increase. And so usually when we have a social policy strategy which hasn't worked, the best thing to do is to try and rethink. We're talking about 5,000 deaths just from opioids, 5,000 deaths a year in Canada. And I think most people and most Canadians are now saying we need to rethink and we need to work out whether, if we believe that people have an illness, that then making them criminals for their illness is the right way of going.
But I guess the question
Can I just interrupt for a moment, please? Excuse me. I just wanted to respond
please
to the professor's commentary here. What one sees is you can contain and limit the damage. We still have forest fires, we still have pathologies of society, but we try to limit the extent of them and the total burden of them on society. And you have to have a criminal justice capacity to be able to say trafficking and possession and use have dimensions that are so injurious to the people we're trying to protect and save into recovery, that we have to have some dimension of being able to leverage the circumstance. We can't simply give in and yield to what is highly dangerous.
That's just some of what we covered this week on The Agenda. For more, including the full conversations, you can visit our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.